Lonely rancher bought young pregnant woman sold by her mother, then found the miracle he'd waited for all his life. Beneath the veil of dusk, the ramshackle hut at the rear of the supply barn reeked of perspiration, lamp fuel, and a hush that came at too low a price. Clara's arms bore angry marks from the metal restraints her mother had fastened just 60 minutes prior. Her rounded abdomen rose and fell heavily as she perched on the earthen ground, avoiding every gaze. 8 months along, and you haven't considered she might require a physician. Elias's tone sliced into the space, deep and rough-edged. Not furious, not gentle, merely weary. She requires a spouse, not some cursed healer, snarled the elder female, her chapped mouth twisting as she shifted her stance from one filth-caked boot to the next. A fellow like you should understand that much. I have no use for a bride, Elias replied, his stare fixed not on Clara, but someplace beyond her, as though spotting specters in the patterned timber panels. I seek peace. The transaction concluded without additional fuss. 2 tarnished silver pieces, aged and dim, 1 flask of liquor, and a written pledge for half a slaughtered cow by autumn. The mother released the shackles as if loosening a bag of root vegetables, then shoved Clara toward the exit. Don't cause him grief, she grumbled. He gave more than your value. Elias kept his distance from her. He merely gestured to the expectant steed, its coat glossy with moisture. Clara mounted gingerly, her vision stinging, her neck raw from holding back tears. The trek to his property passed in quiet, save for the breeze. It spanned 3 miles over paths clogged with grit and the outlines of evergreens that appeared to inhale. His dwelling perched on the brink of emptiness. No nearby folks, no barriers, only untamed terrain and a veranda that seemed untouched by joy for years. He aided her descent, indicated the entrance. Within, the atmosphere was pristine, overly so. No trace of pipe smoke, no fragrance of scent, just hearth embers and citrus polish. A lone picture dangled askew above the fireplace, a lady with lively gaze and palms cradling an infant's wrap. The babe absent. You may remain here, Elias stated, directing toward a chamber on the left. The mattress is sturdy. Water's near the hearth. I won't enter unannounced. Clara stayed mute. Her digits lingered close to the concealed crease in her footwear where she'd stitched a slender edge weeks back. She dipped her head once and entered. The space carried hints of lilac and grime, the bedding draped in a coverlet too elegant for the dwelling's modesty. A comb, a looking-glass, and a duo of pristine slippers rested orderly by the cabinet. It wasn't a cage, yet it carried that weight. Deep into the evening, well past when the wild dogs began howling at the heavens, Clara remained alert, one palm on her midsection, the other gripping the handle of the blade. The infant stirred, her inhale hitched. She strained for any tread. None came, only gusts and the sporadic groan of ancient timbers easing. Near the stroke of 12, she eased from beneath the blanket, mindful not to coax a squeak from the planks. The weapon was compact yet keen. She drew it out and padded shoeless toward the main area. No glow, no murmur. Her pulse thrummed like a war drum in her skull. She advanced to the stoop. A light drizzle had started, sparse, chilly, murmuring. She spotted him there. Not abed, not spying on her, but crouched on the planked surface, lantern flickering nearby. Elias was lacing fresh hide into a ripped harness. His forehead creased in focus, his grip firm. The downpour drenched his garment, trickled from his locks. He failed to sense her. He murmured gently to emptiness. She always claimed this spot demanded fixing. She implied beyond the barrier. Clara halted rigid, the blade dangling idle at her flank. He glanced upward, at last perceiving her, and uttered solely, couldn't rest. She shook her head. He inclined once, then resumed the harness, sewing amid the calm. Returned to her quarters, Clara tucked the blade beneath the cushion. Not from faith, not quite, but from a feeling more intricate, one that ached milder than dread. Come dawn, he placed loaf and elderberry preserve on the board. No message, no inquiries, merely bread and quietude, the sort that lacked burden for a change, simply serene. The dawn light poured through the delicate drapes of the space Elias had assigned her, throwing gentle amber patterns over the meticulously sewn blanket. Clara rose to sit, the aroma of preserved blooms still lingering in the nooks, blending with something ancient, fir wood, subtle floral remnants, and the passage of seasons. The chamber had remained unaltered for ages. A ring of incomplete needlework rested on the ledge by the pane, yarn dangling like an abandoned vow. Next to it, a volume of sacred verses frayed from frequent handling. In the center of the far wall, a portrait hung slightly tilted. A woman no older than Clara Ara herself, with dark hair pinned neatly, and a quiet look in her eyes. Not smiling, not sad, just waiting. Elias never entered the room. Each morning she woke to warm cornbread left outside her door, a kettle already singing on the stove. Some days there were extra firewood bundles neatly stacked, a clean dress mended and folded at the end of her bed. He said little, just nodded when she passed. At night, the house was still, the only sound the tick of the mantel clock and the faint crackle of firewood settling into ash. Clara had lived in homes where yelling filled the walls, where hunger paced the floors, where silence was sharp and angry. But this silence was different. It did not watch her with suspicion. It let her breathe. One afternoon, as the wind shifted and clouds gathered low over the valley, a sharp knock startled Clara Ara while she peeled carrots by the open window. Elias opened the door before she could react. A woman in a black bonnet stood outside. Mud caked up her boots, her jaw set like stone. "Martha," Elias said, voice even. "I came for eggs," the woman snapped, eyes sliding past him to Clara, "and to see this girl you brought in." Clara instinctively stepped back, the roundness of her belly unmistakable even under the shawl. "Well," Martha hissed, hands on her hips. "Ain't she ripe?" Barely grown herself and already swelled up like a fall pumpkin. "What's the matter, Elias?" Town too quiet without a scandal. Elias didn't move. "She your new pet?" Martha spat. "Didn't take long, did it? After burying your wife, now you bring in some barefoot hussy from the flats. You always did like an young." Clara froze. The knife in her hand trembled slightly, but Elias simply looked at the woman, his jaw set. "You want eggs?" he said. "Take them." He turned, walked into the kitchen, and came back with a small basket. He held it out without a word. Martha snatched it, eyes still burning holes through Clara. "She won't last, you know. Trash never does." Still, Elias said nothing. He stepped back, placed one hand gently on the door, and closed it. Not slammed, just closed. The click echoed in the silence that followed. Clara stood for a long time after Martha left. Her fingers rested on her belly, the child stirring inside. She waited for Elias to explain, to apologize, to tell her she was not what that woman said. But he didn't. He turned to the porch, took his place on the worn wooden rocker, and began whittling a piece of cedar without looking up. He had not defended her. He had not denied it. He had just shut the door. That night, Clara sat at the edge of the bed, brushing out her hair in front of the mirror. Behind her, the portrait of the other woman, the wife, watched in stillness. Clara whispered to it almost without meaning to. "He's more afraid of their words than mine." And she realized then he had not bought her to save her. He had bought her because he'd stopped believing in his own worth. Because ghosts were easier than people. Because silence could not accuse him of anything. But she was not a ghost. She was still alive. And her child would be too. The wind howled like something feral that night, rattling the shutters and creeping through the floorboards like cold fingers, looking for warmth. Clara lay in bed, eyes open, muscles tense. Every creak of the house fed her unease. She had counted the days, nearly weeks, since her mother sold her off like livestock. Elias had not touched her, not even spoken more than necessary. But the silence was no longer comforting. It felt like waiting for a rope to tighten. She rose without lighting the lamp, dressing quietly in the long coat Elias had left hanging on the peg. The blade tucked in her boot pressed against her ankle, a grim reminder that freedom always came with a price. She pulled on thick socks, wrapped her shawl tightly, and stepped out through the back door. The cold hit her like a slap. Snow had started falling, light but fast, piling over the cracked stone path. She pressed on through the wind, teeth clenched against the sharp bite of air, her boots crunching softly. She did not know where she was going, only that it had to be away. Away from the house with the silent man, away from the whispers, away from the ghost of a woman in every threat of that bedroom. But a sudden twist of pain in her side stopped her mid-step. She gasped, grabbing the railing for balance. Another jolt, lower this time and stronger. She doubled over, the snow stinging her knees as she fell. Her breath came in short bursts, fogging in the dark. "No," she whispered, pressing her palm to the taut curve of her belly. "Not now, please, not now." A sound, footsteps heavy and fast. Then Elias's voice rough with urgency. Clara, she did not answer. She could not. The pain surged again. Then his hands were under her, lifting her with ease, her body pressed against the soaked wool of his coat. He carried her back into the house without a word, straight past the fire, into the warmth of the quilted bed. He knelt beside her, his face flushed from the cold, and placed a calloused hand on her stomach. His voice, when it came, was low and strained. "Do not let your child die because of what people say." His words struck her like thunder in a quiet sky. She stared at him, unable to look away. In that moment, he was not the silent man who avoided questions. He was someone else, someone who knew what it meant to lose. Later, when the pain dulled and her breath returned to normal, Clara Ara spoke for the first time about her past. "She wanted me to serve drinks," she said, eyes fixed on the dancing flames in the hearth, top-pour whiskey, and sit on laps and smile like nothing mattered. The miners paid better if the girl was pretty. She paused, fingers gripping the edge of the quilt. I said, "No, once, just once." She locked me in the goat shed for 2 nights. After that, I stopped saying no. Elias said nothing. He just stared into the fire, shoulders tense. "I ran," Clara continued, "found a job cleaning sheets at a boarding house in Dry Creek. That's where I met him, the father. He was kind until he was not." She looked at Elias. "I do not even know if he knows. I do not know if I want him to." Elias nodded once slowly. Then he rose, set a fresh log on the fire, and left her to sleep. But sleep did not come easy. Clara drifted in and out of half-dreams. Her mother's voice, the smell of whiskey, the weight of a man's breath on her skin. Sometime after midnight, she woke with a start. There was a sound, faint, heartbreaking, crying. She sat up, breath caught in her throat. The baby? No, it was coming from outside her room. She rose quietly, walked toward the source, and stopped at the end of the hallway. Through the open doorway, she saw Elias seated by the front window, the moonlight tracing silver lines across his face. In his lap lay a tiny dress, pink, hand-stitched, delicate as a sigh. He held it like one would hold a memory they were afraid to break. "She made it after the 3rd, Elias said softly without turning. "Still believed it'd be different next time." Clara stepped closer, her voice barely above a whisper. "The 3rd? What?" "The 3rd loss," he said. "She lost 7. I buried each of them behind the ridge. Boys, girls, we never named them." He traced the hem of the dress with one finger. "I buried this one after the 7th. Could not look at it anymore." Clara stood in silence, the air thick with a sorrow that stretched beyond years, beyond words. And in that moment she understood. He did not shut the world out because he was cruel. He shut it out because it had taken everything he once dared to love. The morning after, the crying, the snow had mostly melted, revealing the brown, brittle grass beneath. Clara stood at the kitchen window, watching Elias saddle his horse. He moved slow, precise as always, but something had shifted. Last night had changed the quiet between them into something else, no longer made of fear or uncertainty, but of shared sorrow. After he rode off toward town, Clara wrapped herself in her shawl and stepped outside. The wind had softened, the air damp with thaw. She followed the narrow trail behind the barn, boots crunching on half-frozen soil, past the chicken coop and the broken fence. The footprints led her farther than she had ever dared to go. Through a thinning grove of pine, up a gentle rise, where the trees grew sparse and the sky widened. At the top of the ridge she saw them. 7 markers, worn and uneven, arranged in a line like forgotten prayers. No names, just numbers crudely etched with a blade into the weathered wood. Clara's breath caught in her throat. She knelt before the last one, the 7th. The earth there was newer than the rest, the grass struggling to grow. A single wildflower, stunted and bent from the cold, leaned against the marker as if mourning too. She reached out, fingers trembling, and laid her hand on the wood, warm, somehow impossibly warm. And just like that, the tears came, not because of fear or shame or loneliness, but because of the weight of it all, The silence she had mistaken for menace, the grief mistaken for cruelty. Elias was not the man the village whispered about in shadows. He was a man who had buried 7 pieces of hope. She cried for them, for him, for herself. She did not hear him approach, but when she turned, he was there, standing at the edge of the grove, hate in hand, eyes unreadable. He did not speak, did not move, just watched her the way someone watches fire, knowing it can warm or destroy. "I thought you killed her," Clara whispered, voice thick. "I thought they said—" "I know what they say," Ellis replied softly. "And I let them. Why? Because arguing takes more breath than silence." His eyes drifted to the markers, then back to her. Each one took a little more from her and me. By the 7th, there was nothing left. Clara stood slowly, her hand brushing the edge of the wooden cross. "She tried to plant roses here," he said. "Never grew. Soil's too thin. Wind takes the petals. Maybe this spring," Clara said. "We try again." For the first time, his face shifted barely, a flicker of something almost like disbelief. Then he nodded once, the way a man nods when he hears something he did not realize he needed to hear. They stood there a while longer beneath the sky that promised more cold before warmth. The ridge felt sacred, not in the way of churches, but in the way of pain remembered and honored. Then, without a word, they walked back down together, steps slow, even and side by side. The days lengthened, and the snow began to pull back its icy fingers from the earth. Shoots of stubborn green poked through the frozen ground. The sky no longer A-flat gray, but tinged with the pale blue of an approaching spring. Something within the house shifted too, not loudly, but gently, quietly. Clara no longer waited for Elias to leave before stepping outside. She joined him, pulling on gloves, holding nails as he mended the south fence, handing him boards as he patched the roof of the woodshed. She limped a little now, the weight of her belly more pronounced with each week, but she moved with purpose. At noon she cooked corn, stewed beans, rabbit Elias trapped that morning. Sometimes he spoke, most times he listened. And every evening, as the fire crackled and the sky turned from gold to navy, Clara read aloud from the worn Bible that sat in the kitchen hutch, its pages soft from years of turning. She read slowly, pausing to ask questions, to wonder aloud about passages. What does it mean when it says, "Sorrow may endure for a night, but joy cometh in the morning"? Elias, carving a spoon from hickory in the rocking chair, replied without looking up. "It means sometimes you have to lose something to understand what's worth finding." One afternoon, Clara stood near the porch where Elias tended to a crooked line of wooden stakes running along the fence. She noticed the soil was darkened, turned fresh. Beside each stake sat a bulb half buried. "You're planting roses again," she said, stepping closer. He glanced up, wiping his hands on a rag. "They won't take, never have." Clara crouched slowly beside one, her hands pressing lightly into the earth. "Then why keep trying?" Elias shrugged. "Because she believed they would," said even the hardest ground gives in if you're patient enough. "And you?" He hesitated, then looked at her fully. "I never believed it, but I kept planting, because when she looked out and saw them, even the ones that didn't bloom, she smiled like they did." Clara swallowed the lump rising in her throat. She reached for one of the stakes and turned the soil gently, carefully recovering the bulb. I think she was right. Later that night, as wind whispered against the windows and the warmth from the stove wrapped the room like a blanket, Clara sat at the table, one hand on her stomach. The baby kicked beneath her palm, rhythmic and strong. "If it's a girl," she said softly. "I'll name her Rose." Elias looked up from his whittling. His eyes met hers, quiet, steady. "She'll be stubborn," Clara added. "She'll grow where no one thinks she can, even if it takes time." Elias set the carving aside and nodded, not quickly, but with weight. "That's a good name," he said, "and a better hope." The silence between them that night was no longer a wall, but something shared, like a field waiting for seeds to bloom, like the space between heartbeat and breath. For the first time in weeks, Clara did not dream of the mining town, or her mother's fists, or the smell of whiskey on a stranger's coat. She dreamed of sunlight through rose petals, of small hands tugging her braid, of Elias smiling not just with his mouth, but with his whole face as a girl, with dirt-streaked cheeks, chased chickens through wild flowers. And in the dream the roses bloomed, not perfectly, note all at once, but enough. The wind that night was different, hot, dry, charged with a stillness that made even the coyotes fall silent. The sky above the ridge had turned a bruised shade of purple, and thunder rolled low like a warning drum from the heavens. Elias stood on the porch, watching the distant mountains. A flash of lightning lit the horizon, followed seconds later by a crack of thunder so sharp it split the sky. Then came the smell, acid, biting smoke. Clara was setting dishes on the table when the first curl of haze drifted through the open window. She paused, nostrils flaring. The baby moved restlessly inside her as if sensing something was wrong. Elias burst through the door. "There's a fire," he said quickly, already reaching for blankets. "Up by Briar Ridge, wind's bringing it this way." Clara moved to the door, looking out toward the treeline. Flames flickered on the distant slope like angry stars falling to earth. "We need to move," Elias said, shoving cloths into a bucket of water. "The old stone hut north trail, it's safe." Clara nodded, her heart racing. But as she turned to grab her coat, a sharp pain stabbed through her spine, forcing her to double over. "Elias," she gasped, clutching the edge of the table. He was at her side in seconds, eyes wide. "It's time," she whispered, panic rising in her throat. "The baby." Another contraction hit harder this time, stealing her breath. Smoke thickened around them. The fire was coming fast. Elias did not hesitate. He soaked 2 blankets in the bucket, wrapped one around her shoulders and the other around himself. Then, with strong arms, he lifted her as if she weighed nothing, cradling her belly against his chest. "Hold on," he said, and kicked the door open. Outside, the world had turned orange. Ash floated through the air like snow, and the wind screamed across the field, carrying sparks with it. The trail to the stone hut twisted through a narrow ravine, half choked with dry brush, and the flames were hungry. But Elias knew the way. He moved fast, breath coming in short bursts, boots thudding over the dry earth. Clara cried out as another contraction racked her body. "I cannot," she gasped. "I cannot do this." "Yes, you can," Elias gritted. "Just breathe. Hold on to me." The fire was behind them now, but not far. Trees crackled and burst in flame along the ridge. Smoke poured into the trail like a black tide. Clara buried her face into his chest, trying to block the heat, the fear, the pain. Each step jolted her. Each breath tasted of cinders. Then, just as her vision started to fade, they reached it. The old stone hut built into the hillside, part rude cellar, part memory. It had once been a birthing place, too, long ago when hope had lived inside it. Elias kicked the door open, carried her in, and set her down on the straw-strewn floor. The walls were cool, thick, untouched by fire. He worked fast, laying her on the blankets, fetching water from the barrel stored inside, lighting a small oil lamp. Outside, the fire roared, but the stone muffled the sound to a distant thunder. Clara screamed as another wave hit. Her body buckled. She clutched Elias's hand, nails digging deep. "I am scared," she whispered. "So am I," he said, kneeling beside her. "But you are not alone." Hours passed, or maybe only minutes. It was hard to tell. Pain bled into pain. Elias wiped her brow, whispered encouragement, held her hand through every groan and cry. He had seen death come through childbirth 7 times before, but this time he fought it. He fought it for her. Finally, a silence, then a final cry, sharp, raw, and undeniable. And then, over the sound of wind and crackling brush, came another cry, high-pitched, new, alive. A baby's wail filled the hut. Clara gasped, body shaking. Tears streamed down her face. Elias cradled the small red bundle in his arms, wrapped it tight in cloth, and handed her over. "A girl," he whispered. Clara laughed and cried at once, taking the child into her arms. "Rose," she said. "She's Rose." Outside, the fire began to die. Inside, life had begun. The first light of dawn seeped through the cracks in the stone walls, soft and golden, carrying with it the scent of scorched earth and new life. The fire had moved on during the night, its fury reduced to distant smoke trails rising on the horizon. But its memory still lingered in the air, clinging to skin and breath like a shadow. Inside the hut, however, something brighter had taken root. The baby's cries rang out again, fierce, unrelenting, full of breath and new purpose. It was not the whimper of something fragile, but the cry of something determined to live. It echoed off the stone walls like a hymn, a sound no one had heard in that place before, not for 10 long years, and it's hattered the weight of that silence in a single moment. Elias knelt beside Clara, his hands stained with soot and blood, his shoulders trembling, not from fear, but from something far more vulnerable, relief. His chest rose and fell in uneven gasps, as if he too had been reborn with the child. He looked down at Clara, who held the newborn to her chest with shaking arms, her face pale with exhaustion and glowing with wonder. There was dirt on her cheeks, sweat on her brow, but her eyes were blazing. The baby, slick with the mess of arrival, squirmed and rooted blindly, searching for warmth, for milk, for a voice she recognized. Her fingers curled in the air like petals unfurling in the sun. Clara looked up at Elias through tears that had yet to dry. "She's strong," she whispered, her voice catching in her throat. "She's loud," Elias replied hoarsely, a ghost of a smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. The lines in his face softened for a fleeting second, making him look almost young again, like the man he might have been long ago before sorrow carved its name across his back. He reached out, his hand unsteady, slow, as if approaching something sacred. With a trembling fingertip, he brushed the baby's cheek. Her skin was soft, impossibly soft, like silk warmed by firelight. She blinked, eyes still cloudy with a blur of birth, and let out a yawn so small, so human, it broke him open. "Rose," he murmured. "She'll be Rose." Clara cradled the infant tighter, her lips pressed to the child's damp hair. "You named her." "No," Elias said quietly. "You did. I just believe it now." He shifted, his body sagging with the weight of what had just passed, and leaned heavily against the stone wall. The smoke had begun to creep in through the cracks again, thin, pale, almost forgotten, but it clung to them still. Elias's face-tree with soot turned gray. His lips were cracked. His eyes dulled. Clara's smile faded. "Elias," he did not answer. "Elias," she said again, louder this time, urgency climbing her spine. The baby whimpered at her chest, sensing the change. "Still nothing." She reached for him with a trembling hand, her fingers closing around his forearm. It was limp, too limp. He slumped sideways, collapsing to the floor like a marionette with its strings cut. "No, no, Elias," she cried, shifting Rose into the crook of her arm and dragging herself toward him. Her knees scraped the stone, her heart pounded so loud it drowned out thought. "Look at me. You stay with me. Do you hear me?" He did not move. She pressed her ear to his chest, her breath held so tight it hurt. There, a sound, faint, shallow, but there. "Please," she whispered, pressing her forehead to his shoulder. "Please don't leave, not now." Not when she's here, she shook him once, twice. Still nothing, and then Rose cried. A piercing, angry wail that ripped through the air like thunder. It was not fear or hunger. It was insistence, a call back to life. Elias gasped. His chest rose sharply, then fell. Another breath, rough, rasping, but alive. His eyes fluttered open, unfocused at first. Then they found Clara's face. "She's got lungs," he croaked. Clara laughed, the sound breaking halfway into a sob. "So do you?" He smiled faintly, his eyelids fluttering closed again. "Guess I'll need them." Outside, the fire smoldered into memory. The smoke lifted, and inside that battered, soot-blackened hut, the three of them stayed close, wrapped in silence, in breath, in the fragile miracle of survival, bound not by blood, but by the cry that named a child and resurrected a man, bound by a rose that bloomed in the middle of ruin. 1 year later, the house that once stood in silence now hummed with life. The wooden fence was rebuilt, sturdy and straight, wrapped with soft vines and wild grass that had returned with the spring rains. A cradle sat by the front window, carved from cedar and smoothed by hand, where a baby once slept and now stood, learning to walk, one wobbling step at a time. The rose bushes by the porch had bloomed. Not all of them, not perfectly, but enough. Delicate pink petals opened toward the sun, stubborn and tender. They grew, where only failure had lived before. Inside the house, laughter echoed in the kitchen. Clara stirring stew, humming softly as Rose babbled on the floor, clutching a wooden spoon like a scepter. Elias sat at the table, mending a doll's torn arm with the same patience he once used to sew saddles and shoes. Letters came now, wrapped in blue ribbon or tucked inside baskets of cornbread and peach jam. Some were apologies, some were blessings. All came from the same mouths that had once whispered cruelty. They left quilts, socks, even a note scribbled in a child's hand that said, "Sorry for what my mama said." The porch became a gathering place on warm evenings. Sometimes neighbors stopped by, awkward at first, bringing pie or old stories. Clara never asked why they came. She just passed around the tin cups and let them come again. One morning, Clara held Rose on her hip, pointing to the flowers by the fence. "She called you Bay yesterday," she said, smiling. Elias raised an eyebrow before Ma. Clara laughed twice. I counted. He chuckled, that quiet, familiar sound that still made her chest ache in the best way. "She's a clever one." "She's yours," Clara said softly, meaning more than the words. He reached out and touched the child's cheek. Ours. That evening, as the sun melted into amber across the valley, Rose toddled barefoot through the yard. Her curls bounced with each step. One chubby hand clutched around the stem of a fresh-picked rose. She squealed with delight at a butterfly, stumbled, and rose again undeterred. Clara watched from the porch, hand resting on her belly, now round once more with new life. Elias stood beside her, his hand gently on her back. The land around them, once scorched and barren, had grown green again, not perfect, not easy, but alive. And as Rose ran laughing into the golden light, the petals of her rose trailing behind her like blessings, Clara whispered, "Some things must be lost to make room for miracles. And even in a place turned to ash, flowers can still bloom." If this story stirred something in your heart, if you felt the quiet strength of a man who thought he had nothing left, the resilience of a young woman rising from betrayal, and the miracle of a rose blooming from ashes, let us know with a like, a comment, or most of all, a subscription. This is Wild West Love Stories, where forgotten romances are brought back to life, where broken hearts learn to beat again, and where miracles grow in the most untamed places. Subscribe to stay with us through every tale of longing, redemption, and love that defied the frontier. And don't forget to hit the bell so you never miss a story where bullets missed, but hearts didn't. Thank you for writing with us. We'll see you in the next story.